Okay, I think I have the bizarre lighting fixed. Okay, so like I said, the number one thing that happens when people talk about cults and cult recruitment, or how that even starts or goes down, the number one thing people say is, "Well, I simply would see that coming. I wouldn't be somebody that I'm not the type of person that would happen to." And I can assure you and promise you, as the victim of a violent crime 7 years ago, 8 years ago, actually, who was set up on a online date, which turned into a robbery, which fucked up my life forever. From pistol whipped and getting a brain injury. That's a long sentence, isn't it? That we all think. I thought if I met somebody in a public place, like a public park, at like lunchtime around other people, that such a thing would not happen to me. I would not be fooled or tricked or coerced into some kind of event against my will by people who were trying to dominate me. That is what I would have said. I would have said I did everything right, so like surely that is ridiculous that would even be a question. Well, that is exactly what people who are in cults all over America and around the world will say. They'll say, I can see maybe how the people in the documentary were coerced, or in a movie, or a character in a book. They'll say, well, yeah, that makes sense for that, but that's not the kind of thing, one, that happens in everyday life, and two, if it were to occur, I would definitely be the person who would not be fooled. So, and I think everybody should maybe take a moment to think about how arrogant that statement is. Like, the world truly is full of manipulators, con artists, people with bad intentions who are trying to get over on other people. And I know from volunteering for jail library for 8 years and running a program that there's a whole awful lot of people who are on either ends of those, either the fooled or the ones fooling. And there's actually a prolific amount of people who are in these two categories. And some people are actually so good at it. I'm sorry, there's somebody hammering for some unknown reason over my fence just right I'm doing this video. Anyway, these people, it's like their career. It's just like, okay, their school is basically usually a school of hard knocks. Usually it's the environment they grew up in, the people that they have been around their whole lives. Oftentimes it's their parents or family members or closest friends that have indoctrinated them within this lifestyle. And if you were to point it out to them, they would either deny it and say that's not what they are, or they would be proud of it and brag about it. It's really only two answers, really. But as many of the people who dominate, manipulate, convince, coerce, romanticize, love bomb, whatever, cajole others into these positions, there are just as many people who are the ones who are being sucked in, right? And there really is no, there's this idea that like somebody who, here it goes with the hammering again, somebody who I can't think when this guy's hammering. Like kind of like the comedic part of this video. All right, so basically there is no like one type of person, that is becomes a victim or a semi-voluntary. It's usually, I'm not talking about cults where people are like kidnapped or sex trafficking rings, or though many cults use sex trafficking as a means to an end to recruit more people and to make money, and also simultaneously to control who's already in it. I mean, that's the whole thing. But it's more like there's a stereotype that there is somebody who would join a cult is like maybe a very foolish person, a person who is very naive, very like idealistic, somebody who easily controlled by others, has no mind of their own. Maybe they're considered people who are running away from something, and so they want an alternative lifestyle to join because maybe there's something in their daily life that they're trying to run from, you know. Or usually it's thought of that it's crazy people who are loopy, people who are mentally ill or have severe trauma history, so they're easily manipulated by others because that's kind of how they have lived their whole lives. You know, they've been under the thumb of somebody taking advantage of them their whole lives, so this is like a familiar world. Or people who don't know how to take care of themselves, people who are very codependent, can't think for themselves, can't make a living for themselves. People who are lost, people who are drug addicts, people who are love addicts, people who are into polyamorous lifestyles, or, you know, into sexual practices that are non-traditional. These are all the, you know, lonely people who have nothing else going on in their lives, so they're easily sucked up by these groups, you know. People have no life outside of their job, or they have searching for meaning, searching for something. Now that's all true, that those are all weak points that the recruiters hone in on. However, the major thing I think that is missing in that scenario is cult members are usually actually kind of lazy, in that they're very good at like being charming and doing their speeches and exerting the illusion of totalitarian authority control. However, from what I've studied, like, they're just not the hardest workers, honestly. They tend to be very entitled because, of course, they think they're prophets, or they think that they're all that, you know, like they're like, they think so highly of themselves, and of their intellect, of their superiority over others, that, you know, other people are like less than them, or not of their caliber. That's why they're the leader. That's why they're the master. That's why everybody needs their legacy to follow, like their, that's why they are the Pied Piper of the room full of children who will blindly follow them, right? So they have such, and they're usually busy sexually exploiting, and they're in the spoils and pleasures of what they've created. Like they want to be on that end. They want to be on the end of receiving money, receiving status, receiving praise and admiration. Okay, they don't want to be the one doing all the bureaucratic, boring work and all the little stuff that has to be done to run a giant organization, especially one that's kind of underground, and usually masquerading as something else, of course. Like nobody's like, well, I guess like once you get to Nexium or like these big, when they finally become something massive that's like Branch Davidson, or like once they get to that status, then maybe they're out and proud about what they are. But initially, most cults have like a front, right? They have an organization, and this is very prevalent in the movie book that I always talk about when I talk about cults, which is Under a Banner of Heaven, which is about Mormon lifestyle, where a family really and a community become almost orthodox. They go back to sort of orthodox version of their religion. It's very misogynistic and very like to control everybody and sort of have ultimate power. They kind of want to pull people from modern society into this sort of old way of doing things, which ultimately leads to them being the most controllable, and then they commit violent acts or acts of children and sexuality, blah blah blah. It becomes something grotesque, really. But the front is that they are running a legitimate family business, and of course, they're accountants or bookkeepers, or there's usually like the actual thing and then the front that's covering it. And so people are thinking they're becoming part of the front when they actually are fully entrenched, and they maybe have an idea that that's not what's going on, and they get the underpinnings and they become part of the language. There's a different language that's spoken, and what it really is, and mores that most people would find not acceptable. That's more like considered private, not to be discussed openly, only with each other. And then there's so much sexual, financial, emotional, mind control, doublespeak. Just there's so much going on that people really, and these can be cults where people are living, or many times they're not living. People are living double lives. But anyway, back to my whole point is that usually the leaders are not interested in all the little nitty-gritty details it takes to run this whole thing and make it profitable and keep it a well-oiled machine, because that takes bureaucracy, that takes sort of a dedication. They usually have courses. People are usually signed up for education. There's usually, they run a lot of courses. They run a lot of side hustles to get people drawn in to their rhetoric, to whatever they're selling people, like they're selling them like the Brooklyn Bridge, you know what I mean? And it's like, so somebody's got to keep up the veneer, someone has to keep up the imaginary pretense of, this is the bridge, isn't it beautiful? And like someone has to do all that grunt work. So what I'm trying to say is, when they're recruiting people, when they're trying to draw people into their organization, they're not looking for mentally ill, I don't want to say lazy. They're not looking for like people who can't take care of themselves, have poor hygiene, or like not able to get out of bed and function. Like, that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for extremely hard workers who are very idealistic. They can hook them a lot of times on like the social cue of like it draws in a lot of people who want to make a humanitarian difference. They want to do something good in the community. They want to make their lives matter. They want to be part of something greater that is usually spiritual or religious, or promoting some kind of ideal theme, interest of theirs that is incredibly meaningful to them. So they want people who, one, are willing to work their asses off for actually very little return and under unusual circumstances, and also possibly very flexible with what they're willing to put up with. People who can adapt to environments that on the onset might seem daunting or unappealing, but they really prey on sort of this divine and they have stages of where you are in the lineup of entering the organization. Like, they try to keep the beginners, and then have people who've been there a long time supervise them and sort of mentor them into, like people who have realized they don't like being separated from their past lives, their family, friends, communities, possessions, material goods that they used to have. People who are starting to be like almost semi-whistleblowers, or they're just very uncomfortable, they're asking a lot of questions, they're starting to have doubts, they're starting to want to possibly leave, but they don't know what they would do or how they would leave, or like what kind of life could they have if they break away. They take those people isolated, move them somewhere else, usually not with other people who think like them. They have it runs like a giant prison system, where it's like they know each different segment of the cult, who's thinking what and what stage they're in, and they're very good at like when you're walking down a city street and people are doing games in the streets, and you play, like they have that one where it's like you have cups, and maybe there's a ball or something under one of the cups, and you got to pick which one has it, and they rotate them like musical chairs, and then you have to decide where it went and that kind of thing, and then be clever enough to call it out. It's kind of like that. It's like they're constantly moving everything around, so they destabilize where you think things are, and there has to be like a greater web or hierarchy or network. But none of this is possible unless you have people who are willing to do all the hard work. You need people willing to put in incredibly long hours doing flyers, doing promotions, doing, selling these goods, doing these courses, doing all the phones, doing all the, selling, promoting. If the leader's going to give talks, someone's going to have to organize all that and figure out where that platform's going to be, who's going to attend it, who in the community do they need to hook up with that. And many times this is like, sadly, big players in the community who are also leading double lives, and so it's like everybody's co-signing everybody else's bullshit. And so, but somebody has to figure out who is good for them to tap, who, all this has to happen. So this idea that they're picking people who are so not capable is kind of ridiculous, because if that were true, the whole organization would fold, because usually these leaders have severe personality disorders, and they're a lot of them are like psychotic, and or they're there's a lot of drug addiction, sex addiction, there's a lot going on with these leaders, and I don't really believe that some of these leaders, if you put them in a room and had them like run their own organization for a week, they would even be able to do it. Like they're in a different plane of existence. It's just they want you to think that their plane of existence is much higher than your status, and that you need them. You need them. But in actuality, it's a drop-down system. They fucking need you. Okay, like it's not gonna work without all the little people doing all the boring work. It's just not gonna happen. So I think that's one interesting thing about cults. Now, as far as all the different pieces one of the big pieces is that nobody thinks they're joining a cult. Everybody thinks they're joining a political group. They're joining a religious or spiritual guru type, It's almost like if, your friend wants you to start going to her Pilates class at her gym, and she invites you with a free pass, and then see if you like it, and then the next thing you know, you're going, every Wednesday, and the next thing you know, you're hooked on it. It's kind of like that. It becomes like, it starts off as kind of this is just an independent decision you're making, and then it snowballs, and because they're good at what they do, and that it only works because the people who are involved are throwing themselves into this like at 110% rate. But at first, at first they try to give you a course at a very low price. They try to invite you to something that's free. There's like a luncheon, there's some kind of weekend trip, there's something that hooks you, that has a very that's not asking very much of you, that seems very lucrative, that you're getting a deal, that you're socializing with new people, and you're going to make new friends, or you're going to have a new lover, there's something in it that doesn't seem very threatening and seems highly appealing. But if you were to be asked why it's appealing, you might not be able to answer, because a true manipulator is going to have you so razzle-dazzled that you're not going to sit around. They want you to never critically think. That's the other thing. They keep you as busy as possible because there's so much work to do, one. And two, they have to have you never having idle time, because they do not want you to have time to sit around and think, is this really what I want to be doing with my life? Is this what I thought it was? Is this working out the way I thought? Have I giving up too much. I mean, they're really counting on the sunk fallacy theory, which I talked about last time, which is once you invest X amount of time, X amount of resources into a relationship, it could be a marriage, into a job, into or said career, or into, you know, any kind of thing that you've devoted every, you know, all the best years of your life into, when it starts to fall apart or be really fucked up, it's like there's this fear that, well, if I quit now, if I leave now, if I divorce now, if I, you know, leave this organization now, that'd be like one, admitting that I was wrong, it was the wrong choice, and I wasted all these years, and I got, you know, nobody wants to be a sucker for their own life. Nobody wants to admit that they wasted all their time and, you know, resources, and, you know, gave money to something that was foolish, or that they were a sucker, you know. And this is how, like, the Madoffs of the world, this is how people are able to really pull a scheme for a long time. If they can just get people involved long enough to really have given up a lot over time, to the point where if they were to admit it was all a mistake, or that they were conned, or you know, that they got in a relationship with someone who sucks, you know, and that they're just dumb, you know, for having done that to themselves over time. It's like nobody wants to really face that music, you know what I mean? Like, people are highly invested in not facing their own accountability for where they are in their life. Like, right now, I'm living in a town I hate, and I don't want to be here anymore, and I've been here for like over 20 years, and I want to leave. I'm ready to go. Like, I was ready to go, like, probably the day I moved in. But it's like, it's a big headache, it's a big hassle, it's a big nightmare, like, financially, emotionally, like, it's like a mountain of hell to get out of here, you know. And it's like, people are usually not excited to face shit like that, because a lot of times we don't know what to do. We don't know how to get out of stuff. Like, I don't know how to get out, you know. Like, well, I mean, I'm going to do it. I mean, I've been downsizing my house constantly, and, like, getting rid of as much material goods as I can, so I can leave this Midwest or leave the country, like, you know, fast as possible if it comes to that, because I'm ready to go, you know. It's kind of like that. It's like people usually don't know what to do once they've gotten themselves deep into something. Like, they have planned their whole life around something, and so everything revolves around it. So many people in cults are like, I don't even have a resume. Like, I haven't even talked to anybody outside of this, you know, group for, you know, over a decade. You know, like, I don't even know how to, they usually are speaking a certain kind of lingo. They're at an emotional capacity, much like someone who's maybe in a narcissistic relationship for a long time, where they've been so, their self-esteem or how they feel about themselves has been so decimated over time that it's like, even just like ordering a pizza somewhere, it's just like I've seen accounts where people who left cults were just like, I didn't even know how to, like, go get my oil changed. I didn't even want to make any decisions. I didn't even want to decide to sort my mail. Like, I just couldn't handle I had been so used to people telling me how to do everything a certain way. Yes, I performed those actions on a rote memory thing, like I was just doing things over time that I didn't think about all the little details anymore. But it's like, it becomes overwhelming just to make simple decisions, because it's so, like, your brain has just been taken over almost like by child abuse or child neglect. When you're raised in that, it's just like, just trying to do average things that people do on a daily basis sometimes can be extremely overwhelming, and then you have to hide how overwhelming it is because other people wouldn't understand, and it becomes a whole, like, nightmare. Okay, the sun is setting, so I'm gonna go inside and keep doing this.